What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Next Pats podcast. I'm Phil Perry. Very excited to share this episode with you this week because we're talking to the great Kurt Warner, the Hall of Famer, tremendous NFL Network analyst. You know him, you love him. He's going to be talking to us about all things Drake Maye. What does he see in the young Patriots quarterback? What does his future hold? What can the offensive coordinator here do better to help him out when he is back on the field? As things currently stand, he is still dealing with that concussion. We will soon find out if he'll be able to play against the Tennessee Titans. And what kinds of weapons should the Patriots be surrounding him with? So we have a great conversation with Kurt Warner. What I want to talk about before we get to our conversation with Kurt, however, is the trade deadline. This is the Next Pats podcast. After all, we're always talking about roster building here. What can the Patriots do? What should they do moving forward with some of the pieces that are still at their disposal that may have interest from other teams looking to improve their own situations as they make pushes for playoff spots and championships and things that the Patriots simply aren't in the conversation to do. They've already dealt Josh Uche for a 2026 sixth-round pick. You may be scratching your head saying to yourself, they can get a little bit more for that guy, and there's a reason for that. And they may not be done dealing just yet, but should they be? It depends on the player, in my opinion. First, let's talk about Uche. In my opinion, the reason why you make this move, however minimal the return, is that you were going to lose him this offseason for nothing. And some of our Next Pats listeners out there, I know, are very savvy when it comes to the compensatory pick formula. You might be saying, well, wouldn't they have gotten maybe that exact pick, a sixth-rounder in 2026, just by letting him walk via free agency at the end of the year? Potentially, but not likely. And the reason why is because the compensatory pick formula factors in both compensatory free agents, so they have to be qualifying free agents essentially, compensatory free agents in and compensatory free agents out, and because those two can sometimes cancel out, and because additionally the Patriots have so much money to spend this offseason, the likelihood is they wouldn't have gotten a compensatory pick for Josh Uche. They should be active. They should be signing all types of players. And so if they lose a handful of free agents, compensatory free agents specifically, in all likelihood, those are going to be canceled out by players who get real money from the Patriots this coming offseason. So that to me makes this an okay move, even though it's probably not a massive improvement on whatever compensatory pick another team would have gotten for allowing Uche to walk, or the Patriots in years past, when they had great teams and they were paying their own players and they weren't in all likelihood going to be spending a ton of money on the open market in free agency and bringing in new guys. That just wasn't their MO for the most part with Bill Belichick, 2021 aside. And so you saw them raking in these compensatory picks because they would let their own guys go without really replacing them via free agency. That's what can happen when you actually draft and develop and do both of those things well enough that you can lean on those players and you don't have to go and buy talent. So that's Josh Uche. Now, when it comes to other players, and let's talk about some of the players who I've seen rumored in potential deals. Kendrick Bourne, KJ Osborne, Devon Godshaw, Jonathan Jones, I've even seen. I would be very hesitant to deal several of those names I just mentioned. KJ Osborne, to me, makes sense. Just got here. You hoped he would provide something for you in the way of veteran leadership, of professionalism, and I think he has done those things to a degree. Aside from the fact that he did essentially at least not push back on the idea of him being traded before the deadline very recently in the Patriots locker room with myself and others on the Patriots beat. Even despite that, I think you could still say KJ Osborne is a pro. That to me doesn't make him untradeable. If anybody wants to give you anything for KJ Osborne, go for it. Those other three names, though, Kendrick Bourne, Devon Godshaw, Jonathan Jones, while on the one hand they might not be here still when the Patriots become a contending team, and therefore if you took the coldest of cold looks at this roster and said, why wouldn't we try to swap those guys out for a draft pick that could help us get a player who might be here when we're eventually, good. Well, on the one hand, that would make some sense. And on the one hand, that would be a little bit Belichickian, no question. This is not a Bill Belichick situation as you know it. This is a rebuilding team in need of buy-in, as well as they performed at times in that game against the Jets, and as tough as they showed themselves to be at times. Wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but the way they bounced back after an embarrassing week in Jacksonville, after getting called out by their coach, after being 7-point underdogs at home to a division rival, after losing their best player, Drake Maye, mid-game, I thought that was a ballsy performance by the Patriots in some respects on Sunday. Despite that, they should not be willing to shun anyone who would help the overall buy-in for this roster this year and moving forward. To me, those guys, Kendrick Bourne, Devon Godshaw, and Jonathan Jones, help you in that regard. Those are, in my opinion, Gerard Mayo guys. Those are quote-unquote program guys. And to swap those guys out for draft picks, to me, you'd have to feel really good about your locker room, not only for the rest of this year, but for next year as well. To say goodbye to those guys because you're able to bring in a, 5th round pick? 6th round pick? Maybe a future late day 3 selection? Like the Josh Uche compensation that you were able to acquire? That to me qualifies as the juice not being worth the squeeze. And the reason why I wouldn't be all that excited about the kind of return you might get for those players, Carolina, this just in the last 10 minutes since we started recording. Carolina just traded away Deontay Johnson, wide receiver Deontay Johnson, to the Baltimore Ravens. Obviously, contending team. That trade makes all kinds of sense, right? Here's the compensation. The Panthers are getting a 5th while sending out a 6th with Johnson. So it's a pick swap. It's an old Belichick deal. Let's keep mentioning that name. It applies here, right? You saw this all the time. You'd swap a 6th for a 7th and a player. And at times, those deals were really valuable, and those guys could contribute. But Deontay Johnson, to me, when he's at his best, it's not a bad number 2 receiver. That is a very good number 3 receiver, in my opinion. Not necessarily going to kill anybody down the field, but sure-handed, can rack up a ton of catches, a really good route runner. Day 3 pick swap for that guy? And so now you're hoping to deal away a guy who's actually trying to bring some professionalism and some positivity to that receiver room in Kendrick Bourne, or somebody who is bought in on Mayo's message and has been a part of Mayo's defense, obviously as an assistant to Bill Belichick, but has been here for a while and is viewed, in my opinion, as a leader in some ways in Devon Godshaw, or certainly viewed as a leader, though not a captain, certainly a leader in that locker room, as evidenced by the fact that he broke the team down, goes from Brewski to Slater to Jawan Bentley to now Jonathan Jones because Bentley is out as the guy who's breaking down the huddle and doing the we know what that is. That doesn't matter at the end of the day, but it does go to show you where he sits on the leadership totem pole in New England. You're gonna trade one of those guys and hope to get a real return when there's a legit number 2 receiver going to a contender for a flop of a 5th to a 6th? That's nothing. So, again, I would be reluctant to deal away guys that I would consider program guys, but that's just me. Let's see what the Patriots end up doing in the next few days here before the deadline. All right, enough trade deadline talk. Let's get to what you're really here for, which is Kurt Warner on Drake Maye. Kurt was phenomenal, as always. Here's that conversation. There he is. There's the Hall of Famer, Kurt Warner, one of the best in the business when it comes to his NFL analysis. You can obviously catch him all the time on NFL Network, but particularly you're going to want to catch him on NFL Game Day morning every Sunday at 9 a.m. Eastern on NFL Network. Kurt, thanks so much for being with us again here on the Next Pats podcast. We really appreciate it.
You got it. Always good to be on and talk a little ball.
So I've been dying to talk to you since I watched your QB Confidential video on Drake Maye. This was from the preseason finale, and for those of you watching or listening to us right now that haven't watched these videos that Kurt makes available to everyone who is just interested in understanding the game better, which I love because I'm always trying to do that to get better at my job, You have to check him out. So he did a tremendous video, 30 minutes, on Drake Maye from week 3 of the preseason. And I just want to ask you now, Kurt, because I know you saw some good things. You saw some things in terms of footwork, maybe reading safeties that you thought needed a little improvement. Yeah. From what you've seen of him, knowing it's a pretty small sample, has he improved? And if so, how much?
I've been more impressed. I've been more impressed watching him the last couple of weeks than even I was in preseason. Just his ability and timing in terms of getting the ball out, seeing things and getting the ball out on rhythm, I think is better or has been better the last couple of weeks than I expected, based on what I saw in college and then even some of the stuff that I saw in preseason. So I've been impressed with what Drake has done, his ability to see the field and process information. And as I said, get the ball out on time. It hasn't been perfect. And it's been twofold. I tweeted a couple weeks ago just about how the system and the spacing or lack of spacing that they had, in his first game a couple weeks ago made it really, really hard on him. In some of those situations, there just really wasn't a whole lot to do. Now, he was able to end up having some success in that game because there was a lot of man-to-man coverage late in the game. He was able to make some really good man-to-man throws, and they were able to get some big plays off of it. And then, against Jacksonville in that game, I thought he processed information really, really well and did some really good things in that game. And then, of course, not a whole lot of time this past weekend. Unfortunately, hopefully he bounces back quickly from the concussion. But again, you're just seeing some really good things in him, doing really good things with the football. He's not putting the ball in harm's way and making bad decisions. I want to see him slide a little bit more. Doesn't have to make every extra yard when he's scrambling. But I have been more impressed with what I've seen the last couple of weeks from him than I expected to be at this point in his career.
I'm glad you brought up the spacing question, because that is a question that Alex Van Pelt sort of continued to field after the London game that you mentioned, because it looked like there might be some spacing issues even in that game after the Texans game, which you were referencing. Is that an Alex Van Pelt issue? Is that a receiver talent issue, Kurt? That's another topic that we hammer a lot here in Boston. How do you see it, and what can Van Pelt do to maybe improve things? This is his first year, even though he's been in the league a long time, his first year since 2009 as a play calling offensive coordinator. What more can he do to help out the young quarterback?
Well, that's a question, like when I do these breakdowns, that's the one thing that I'm not privy to, right? I'm not privy to being in the room and knowing how these things are taught. If what I see on film is how it's designed or how it's taught from the coaches, or whether that's players in the moment, not doing what they're supposed to do, affecting the spacing of it. So I don't know the answer. That's where I can throw out the idea that the spacing is not good here. If it's taught where a guy's running a 12-yard route and the guy underneath him is running a 6-yard route, there's something wrong with that design, because there is no way for like one guy can cover both of those guys. There's no way for a quarterback to kind of read that from a high-low perspective. If that's one of those where the outside receiver is supposed to be at 18 and the underneath guy is supposed to be at 6, and now we've got that 12-yard discrepancy where now I can read it high-low, then that's on the receiver for being impatient and cutting it short in a game. And so, some of that stuff, just based off of what I saw, I would say there's probably a mix of both. Some things that may sound really good on paper, but in a game don't calculate to the kind of spacing that a quarterback needs to make a really good decision. And then I have to believe some of the other ones simply based on, I should say this. I see concepts around the league all the time that make me scratch my head. Like, how do you honestly expect a quarterback to read that with that kind of spacing? So I do think, sometimes there's bad concepts from that perspective that, again, sound better than they actually are. But a lot of times when I see that, just my natural inkling is, okay, no coordinator would design it that way. Like, no coordinator would think that was a good idea, because we're putting a check down right underneath, another route, and we're making it easy on the defense or really hard on our quarterback. So some of those situations I really believe is, the impatience of a wide receiver to cut their route short, or somebody getting to an area just too quickly where we're expecting maybe a guy to chip and then get to the flat so we could actually read the 12-yard route and then work underneath, and that guy's getting there too fast. So I think there are a combination of both, but there are certain plays just for me when I watch that I have to give the benefit of the doubt to the coordinator and go, I know they wouldn't design it this way. I know they would not, put this in this kind of spacing because it just doesn't make sense.
And it makes sense that you would think that. It makes sense that you would say that now, Kurt, just knowing what the Patriots have been working with at receiver this year. And Van Pelt and others, Drake Maye included, have been pretty open about how those guys, that group in particular, that receiver group, which is very young in pockets, and they have a couple of veteran guys, but they're not star-level players there, that they need to get on their details when it comes to everything on the field and off. And I wanted to ask you, somebody who played with some great receivers, guys that you helped be great, and vice versa, I'm sure. How critical is that for the Patriots moving forward to make sure that they're surrounding Drake Maye with the right kind of talent? And maybe as a follow-up to that, what type of receiver do you think would be best for Drake Maye? Big, small and shifty, veteran versus a young guy he can grow with? I'm curious to pick your brain on where they should go when it comes to adding to that room. Yeah,
I think, you always want to have talent, right? You always want to have guys. And when I look at talent, I think the biggest thing I look at is, can a guy win in a one-on-one situation? That to me is kind of the biggest thing that I look at when we're speaking of talent. That can look a lot of different ways, but I want to know if a defense comes up and says, hey, we're going to go man-to-man coverage, that I can read the defense and I can expect my guy to win most of the time. That's where talent comes into play. If a team's playing zone coverage against us, to me, the talent level, so to speak, and again, we throw that word around, just from the standpoint of how fast somebody can run or how big somebody is, isn't as important as the things you're talking about with details. I don't care who's playing with me. If those guys can be in the right spot at the right time, against zone coverage, I feel like we can be successful. And then, of course, catch the ball. We can be successful because the bottom line is, the scheme should work for us. When we get into man-to-man situations, that's when we ask the question, okay, is my guy talented enough to beat the guy across from him? And so, of course, we like to be in situations where we can call any play and go, well, my guy's really good in man-to-man. So if a team wants to play man in a situation, we're good. If they want to play zone, we're good. But sometimes you don't have that talent level where you can expect to win across the board. So then that's where the challenge comes in for an offense coordinator to design plays, because there's a lot of plays that you can design or ways to design those plays that can help guys get open in man-to-man, as opposed to, forcing them to have to win that one-on-one battle every time. You can set them up by formations. You can set them up with movements. You can set them up by trying to create leverage to help them win on a particular route. So all of that plays into the mix of who are our guys, what are they good at? But it was really important for me when we were playing against zone coverage teams that I needed you to be where you were supposed to be when you were supposed to be there. If your route's supposed to be at 18 yards, you need to be at 18 yards, because I'm going to anticipate and throw based on the defense, and you got to be where you're supposed to be. And so anytime I've got to hesitate as a quarterback wondering if they're going to be there, or anytime I throw it expecting them to be there and they're not there, that just continues to affect how a quarterback plays the game. Now he's going to hesitate. Now he's going to hold the football a little bit longer. Now he's probably going to be late on some routes because he's waiting to see if that guy's going to be there or going to get open. And all of that stuff just messes up an offense, as a whole. And so, when you ask, what kind of players around Drake Maye, I think the bottom line is if you've got a good quarterback, it doesn't matter the kind of players that you have, so to speak. It's more about figuring out what those players do well and putting them in positions to succeed, running concepts that they're really, really good at, putting those guys in the places on those concepts where they can excel is the most important thing. I played with some big guys. I played with some quick guys, and all of them had their strengths as long as we use them the right way. If I've got a big strong guy that's got good speed, but is slow getting that big body in and out of breaks. I want to keep that guy on the move. If I've got a quick guy that's really good at coming out of breaks, then I'll put him on more of those stop and go routes or in and out routes where we can create separation that way. So to me, it's so much understanding what the skill set of your players are, not necessarily, finding one that fits this particular mold. It's finding good players and then being able to mesh your system to what those players do well.
Last thing I wanted to ask you, Kurt, is we were able to have a conversation with Louis Riddick a couple of weeks ago, and he sees Drake Maye as somebody who has the potential, the ceiling, to eventually be one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL. He did talk about what we're talking about right now, which is the situation needing to improve, needing to settle down in some ways, and that I'm sure includes receivers. It might even include offensive coaches. But how do you view it? How do you view Drake Maye's ceiling? You work with young quarterbacks. You obviously analyze veteran quarterbacks. You've been doing it a long time. I'm curious to get your take on what you view as Drake Maye's potential.
Yeah, I don't like to use the word ceiling because I don't think we know what a player's ceiling is until he hits the ceiling, right? Or at least, the low part of the ceiling, I will say. We don't know what a player is until he shows us that's what he is. We throw around this word ceiling all the time and potential all the time. And I don't think you can put potential on a guy because they're physically talented. That doesn't mean anything to me because the quarterback position is not about necessarily being physically talented. Of course, physical talent can help you in ways and can make the job easier for you or, increase the margin of error that you have. But to me, when it comes to ceiling, it's so much about how well they're going to be able to process, how well they're going to be able to tie their technique to their processing in their mind and seeing things. When the speed of the game is really fast, can they slow it down? Can they slow their bodies down to continually be accurate with the football? So I'm just not a ceiling guy because I don't know what anybody's ceiling is. We don't know the answer to that until we get a chance to really see it play out. He's physically talented without a doubt. I really like what I've seen in the early stages in terms of his processing and playmaking ability. So those two things, seeing those two things early, excite me about what his future can be. But I don't know. I've seen a lot of guys that were really, really good in college and they get to the NFL and they're the same guys 6 years out of college that they were when they got into the league. I've seen other guys, that come out of college that are decent college players, but become great NFL players because they just continue to go up, right? And they continue to show us, what I was doing in college wasn't my ceiling. There's a long distance between who I am now and who I'm capable of being. But none of us know that. And so, it frustrates me when people say, I think his ceiling's really high. Because the only thing we have to go on when we talk about ceiling is how fast can he run and how far can he throw and how high can he jump and all these measurable things that say, if he can do everything he needs to do as a quarterback, his physical skill lets us think that he could be really, really special. But I need to see the mental part of it first before I can even think, this physical part of it can elevate him to Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen and those guys that are really good quarterbacks and extremely talented. So that's where their potential and ceiling is so high. We see other guys in the league that have this unbelievable athletic talent, but don't know how to play the position, and they don't have a chance. We see other guys that are really, really good mentally and aren't very, I want to say aren't very good physically, but aren't to the level of some of those other guys physically. And they're really good in the league because they can play at that level. Now, they may not be the greatest because they don't have the physical. So all of that stuff plays into when we say a ceiling. We just need to know what the capabilities of that player is across the board before we can make that assessment. And all I can say with Drake is, we know he's got good physical ability. I've been impressed with his mental ability and the things that he's done in the early stages. If that can continue to have that uptick, we connect it to the physical part of it. Yeah, he's got a chance to be a really good player in this league. But to me, there's just so much that I need to see and understand in terms of who he is, or maybe more importantly, who he will be for the majority of his career, that I can't really assess any of that right now.
Well, and talking to you right now and remembering your great career that you had, and for those of us in this area that got a chance to watch Tom Brady, talk about a couple of guys who weren't viewed as having, the highest of highs as their quote-unquote ceiling when they were coming out of the college ranks, and guys who improved along the way. So, of course, a ton of value there. Kurt Warner, thank you so much for being with us. It's always fun to talk football with you. You're so generous with your time with us. So frequently, just about every year around this time we get to chat with you. It's always a blast. Thanks again.
No, it is my pleasure. And I love that you throw Tom out there, because I think he's probably the classic example, right, of a guy that just keeps getting better. Even when he's in his 40s, we're watching this guy get better. Most of us would have said, oh, he reached his ceiling in his 30s because he's winning championships and MVPs, and he just continued to get better. And so that's really, I think it's a great point for people around there to go, that's what we want. We want a quarterback that has the capabilities of going like this and pushing the envelope to see how good they can be. And it seems like Drake has that kind of mentality. Now we'll see if the physical and the mental can tie to that, and you can have another long run, with a really, really good quarterback.
People here certainly have high hopes. Kurt, it's going to be a lot of fun to track his progress. Thanks again. Hopefully we'll get a chance to talk to you soon about Drake Maye.
Sounds good. Look forward to it.
Great stuff there from Kurt. And of course, I should have known. I'm talking to Kurt Warner, one of those incredible underdog stories in all of sports. And we're going to talk about ceilings and potential with him. No, it's about what you show on the field. For somebody like him, I'm sure the same is true for somebody like Tom Brady. Yes, of course, physical skill does matter. And those guys could throw the rock. No question about it. But they had to think their way through the game to get to the point that they got to in their careers, where you have one current Hall of Famer and one in the very near future Hall of Famer in Tom Brady. So that makes a lot of sense. Interesting, too, I thought, the conversation about the spacing and the coordination of the offense. He's giving some credit to Alex Van Pelt, saying to himself as he's watching these games, there's no way an NFL offensive coordinator would design a route concept that way, where the spacing would be so limited. So is it Van Pelt? Is it the receivers? That's something that we might never have the full picture on, because we're not in the building, because we don't know how it's being coached, because we don't know when receivers are erring or if they're doing exactly as they're told and they're just carrying out what are flawed concepts. But it is something to keep in mind as we move forward and we watch Drake Maye progress throughout the rest of this year whenever he does get back on the field, because the Patriots might have a decision to make. In my opinion, if Drake Maye continues to trend upward, and you did hear Kurt Warner talk about how he's been more impressed than he thought he would be by Drake Maye early in his tenure as starter based on what he saw in the preseason. If he continues to go in that direction and we see continued solid performances from him over the course of the season with the surrounding cast that is built the way it's been built, I really don't know how you could move on from Alex Van Pelt, because you could be asking for trouble when it comes to changing the picture, changing the offense, maybe even changing the language for a young quarterback. But if these issues that Kurt mentions continue to be brought up, and people in the know, whether it's Drake Maye, Elliott Wolf, others, understand that, well, actually the receivers are being taught some funky stuff. If that's the case, again, we don't know. We don't have the benefit of knowing because we're not there. But if they don't love how things are going in that regard, would they then be willing to make a switch? Especially depending on who might be out there. And I've got the Giants Steelers game fresh in my mind, right? We just watched Brian Daboll lose another game. Widely considered a great offensive mind. We saw him work very closely with Josh Allen for years. A quarterback whose physical skill set is probably better, but similar to Drake Maye's. Would that be enticing enough for the Patriots to make a move at one of the most important coaching spots on the team, obviously? That I don't know. And again, given where we are right now, I don't think that's really a fair conversation, because I think Alex Van Pelt has done a good job of developing the young quarterback, which is the most important thing organizationally for this team right now, even more important than wins and losses. And to me, he gets a check next to his name in that regard. And my guess is, as he gets more accustomed to calling games, as he gets more accustomed to designing plays, as he gets more accustomed to putting his talent in the best situations week after week after week, you'll see improvement there. He's a diligent guy. He's a smart guy. He's a guy that people really like being around. And that last thing might not matter very much to you, but when it comes to the human element of a team operation, I can tell you from people that I've spoken to that have been in these operations with Alex Van Pelt, whether it's this year or years prior, that stuff does matter for everybody. Can help elevate everyone, can help make a bad situation, which the Patriots have been in for the majority of the season, a little bit better, which can help everybody's performance. So let's hit the pause button on any potential offensive coordinator change talk. But it is worth keeping our eyes peeled for those types of issues that Kurt Warner was discussing with us here on the Next Pats podcast. Thanks so much again to Kurt Warner. Thanks to you for listening, for watching, for commenting on YouTube, for commenting on Apple Podcasts. We really appreciate it. It helps keep the podcast going, helps us be the best version of ourselves moving forward. So if you could, hit the subscribe button on YouTube, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, leave a comment on both. You really want to do me a solid, right? We're approaching the season of Thanksgiving. I can't tell you how thankful I would be if you actually went double barrel with the subscriptions in the comments. That would make you a platinum Next Pat subscriber, in my opinion. Maybe we can work up some plaques, or I could, send out some cards, something along those lines, for those of you that are able to do that. Anyway, you get the point. Help us out. We really appreciate it. We'll talk to you next week. Always something to talk about with this team. I'm sure we'll find something between now and then.